Pleasure to meet you all. My name is Mark Brocato. I'm the head of engineering for Tonic's Fabricate product. Fabricate actually started out as my own company, and it got acquired by Tonic earlier this year. So it's a very small team operating within a somewhat larger organization, not super large. Tonic is still a pretty small startup. And we specialize in synthetic data generation from scratch. But Tonic overall, we really see ourselves as solving data bottlenecks. And basically, we unblock innovation by providing high fidelity synthetic data. Even large companies, like they have access to tons of data that they've accumulated, but do the developers have access to it? Do the salespeople have access to it? Do the QA testers have access to it? In many cases, no, especially for businesses that are in more sensitive domains like financials, healthcare, anybody who's regulated. Like in theory, the company has that data in their production database. And if an issue comes up, they, in theory, could be able to use that data to troubleshoot the issue, but oftentimes their bylaws say that their developers can't access that data, and there's a strict firewall between development and production. So that's where we sort of step in and help out. Tonic has three main products, and there's sort of three different approaches to synthetic data generation. The first is Tonic Structural. So it helps with that problem very specifically that I was talking about, which is I've got a ton of data in production. I need to be able to use it in lower environments like testing or staging, but I can't because it's got all this sensitive stuff in it. So Structural identifies that sensitive stuff and then either redacts it or synthesizes new data that looks and acts like that sensitive stuff, but is entirely breaks the chain from the production data and gives you a like staging database or a testing database that looks a lot like your production database or can be much smaller than your production database. If you're a well-established company, you might have petabyte production database and you really don't want that in development. You want something much smaller. Structural handles that subsetting for you. The product that I work on is Tonic Fabricate. And so this is the product that allows you to generate data like purely from scratch. So Fabricate doesn't connect to any production database. It's generally only looking at your schema and your requirements to generate data for new features, for new products, for things that aren't databases like API streams, web logs, payment logs, and also for those use cases where, yes, you do have production data, but it's way too much of a bureaucratic headache to hook up something like Structural to that production data. You need to be able to generate data from scratch, and you can't access production data at all. It's just too risky. And then Tonic Textual is a bit more on the AI development side. So Textual basically identifies, redacts, and synthesizes sensitive data in text documents, principally for training large language models. So if you're like a company that deals in insurance and you want to be able to train AI to detect fraud, you've got like all these documents, payment receipts, et cetera, and you want to be able to have your models train on all those documents, but there's a lot of sensitive data in those documents. Textual finds all that sensitive data, redacts it or synthesizes it, and then that's sort of free for you to then move into model training. So those are our three products, and I'm going to principally focus on the one that I lead, which is Fabricate. So there's three basic approaches to generating data from scratch, or synthesizing data. The first is production data de-identification. That's what Structural does. The second is rules-based data synthesis. So rules-based meaning like you have some declarative approach, and you like have a listing of a bunch of rules that say this column needs to look like this thing, it relates to this other table. You set up all the rules, you hit go, and then it generates a bunch of data. So a lot of configuration, but sort of repeatable results. And then the third, which is the sort of newest thing that we've been working on, and we just recently released a major update to support this, is agentic data generation. And that's what we're going to focus on a lot in our demo, how to use AI agents to generate data. So production data de-identification, basically the idea is that you use data from production and you replace sensitive values with synthetic substitutes. Some of the solutions out there is, like I said, Tonic Structural, DOCX, Redgate. This is a pretty well-established industry. And what I often tell customers or prospects is that if you have production data and you're able to use it in this way, this is the right approach in almost all cases, because it automatically preserves a lot of the nuances and relationships that you don't even necessarily are aware of in your production data. Like this field tends to correlate with this other field. There's nothing in your schema that says that that should happen. It's just that reality says that that should happen. So when you're just focusing on de-identifying the sensitive data and bringing everything else across, then you're able to preserve a lot of the things that you don't even realize are necessary to make the data seem real. So if you have production data, this is generally the most efficient approach, and Tonic Structural is the best product for doing that. Rules-based data synthesis is basically defining declarative rules for generating every column, relationship, cardinality. And some of the example solutions here is the initial release of Tonic Fabricate, which is the product that I work on. A product that you might be aware of, which was also mine from a previous company, which is Mockaroo. Mockaroo is an extremely popular fake data generator tool on the internet, where you set up a schema, you define all the different data types, you hit go, and you get a nice big data set that has realistic looking data. And there's a lot of sort of classical approaches with libraries like Faker for generating data based on these sort of rules. So it allows a lot of throughput. It's very easy to generate a ton of data very quickly. It produces repeatable outcomes because once you've set up these rules, you can sort of get an infinite amount of reincarnations of this data set that will all meet those rules. But that comes at the expense of sort of expressiveness. So there's a lot to learn, a lot to set up. And anything declarative, it's hard to program in a lot of nuance because everything is sort of a one-shot, here are my rules, there's the data sort of a thing. So even though some of these tools have AI assistance for configuring the rules for you, there's no AI feedback loop. There's no way I can easily see, like, did it generate exactly the right data and make a tweak so that it generates better data. So there's a lot of configuration. And then lastly, the area that we're most excited about is this agentic data generation. So basically, in this scenario, you just provide your schema and your requirements to a well-equipped AI agent and let that agent figure out how to generate the most realistic data. Doing basically ad hoc methods, writing code, generating the data on the fly, using its unique understanding of your use case. And to my knowledge, there's really only two good solutions in this space, and both of them are fairly new. Tonic Fabricate, I think, is the best, obviously, since I work on it, but Mostly.ai also has a solution in this space where it's using a purely agentic approach to generating synthetic data. So the best parts about this is that it has a really intuitive UX because there's just almost nothing to learn. You're just chatting with an agent, and we're all sort of getting used to, in the last 6 months to a year, chatting with AI. This is really no different. It works with you to understand your use case and generate data with a really high level of realism and nuance. And it's got a very low barrier to entry because it doesn't need any access to sensitive data. So you generally share with it things that are not sensitive, like your schemas, your requirements, and it goes from there to generate good data. And it's great for a very, very wide range of both input and output formats. Because it's all AI based, you can basically provide a schema of any type and it'll figure it out. It doesn't really care if it's SQL or no SQL or what flavor of SQL or JSON schema, or honestly a picture of an ERD that you took with your phone. It can handle all of that stuff. And the best part about the AI approach is that really it's for the data consumers. At Tonic, we like to think about our potential users in two camps: data producers, so those that work for an IT team that are enabling other teams to get this synthetic data for their testing, for their demos. Those are the producers. And then the consumers are the ones who actually need that data for their testing, for their development, for their demos. Those are the consumers. And so oftentimes these synthetic data tools take a bit of learning, they take a bit of investment, and a company might want to have a central group kind of own generating data, putting that in a data pipeline. Those would be the producers. Agentic approach is so easy to use that the consumers can sort of skip the middleman. They just use the tool directly. They get data out of it. They drop into it, and in 20 minutes, they get the exact data set that they need, and they move on with their day. So before I dive into showing you how the agentic stuff works, I just want to provide a sort of overview of what is an agent, because it's a heck of a buzzword in today's world. So we're all probably familiar with an LLM or a large language model like a ChatGPT or a Gemini or Claude. The way I like to describe an agent is it's the combination of the brain, which is the LLM, the thinking bit, and a body, which is tools that you provide the LLM so that it can autonomously interact with the outside world. I think Descartes once wrote like a brain in a vat is of no use or something like that. So an LLM really can't be that useful unless it can see and touch and look at things and make changes to things. And those are the tools that you give. So we've assembled what we think is the right LLM, the right prompts, and the right tools to make this problem really easy, generating good synthetic data from scratch. So I'm going to step into a demo, and then we'll get back to some of the underpinnings of how things work. So this is Tonic Fabricate, and you start with literally just a prompt box. The way that most users start is not by just typing into that box, but providing some sort of a schema. So I'm going to bring up a schema that I want to demo here. Let me, actually, it's a different window. Hold on. This one here, and I want to do this guy. Okay, so this is a typical like online store schema. So it's a bit small, but it's good for demo purposes. So it's got things like customers, products, orders, the line items in the orders, the payment methods like credit card numbers that you would save, and then the actual payments that tie back to orders. So this happens to be a Postgres schema. You notice there's no database, there's no data in here. It's just the create table statements. So you can take a schema like this and you can just drop it in to Fabricate and say, generate data for this. So first it's going to analyze that schema and then load it into Fabricate's own internal storage. And then it'll poke around a little bit at the tables and ask you some questions about, what type of data or what are the constraints for the data that you need to generate, like how much of it, where are your customers, what type of products, things that it needs to know in order to be able to generate the best data possible. So let's see, it's asking about like, record counts, age range of customers, what type of products, when were the orders placed, things of that nature. And I have sort of canned answers that I used for this demo. So rather than watch me type all that out, I'm just going to take them from here. I'll paste them in, and we're going to say 1,000 customers, 20 products, US-based customers, orders in the last 90 days, about this many orders and items per order, and everything else is up to you. So it'll tell you a little bit about what it's thinking, and then it's going to make some assumptions for the things that we didn't answer. And now here's where the real magic starts. So it's going to start writing code to go and generate that data on the fly. So it's not using LLM AI tokens to generate each data point, because that would be very slow and very expensive. It's coming up with these little mini programs on the fly that leverage some AI tokens, like for generating like common last names and things like that, but it's using the AI most efficiently to generate large amounts of data fairly quickly. So you can see it's moving through each of the tables. It generated 1,000 customers in the US. It generated our clothing products here, where the names and the descriptions and the prices all match up. It created our orders. It created the order items. And you can see the code in here if you wanted to look at any of this and see what it's doing underneath the hood. And it's just progressing through the whole data model, and now it's done, and it's going to give us a summary of what it's built. Okay, so that was basically two prompts. Here's my SQL schema. Here's the answers to your questions, AI. Now go and build me the initial cut of data. So here's where you would review what's in there, and then you would ask the AI to make any changes if necessary. You can ask it about the data that it generated to. So you could say like, give me a breakdown of customers by age group. And it'll go and figure out how to query that and visualize it for you. And if you wanted to make changes to that, you literally just tell the agent to do so. There's no sort of technical ability needed. You really just need to know the data model and the outcomes that you want. So all chat-based. If you wanted to like refer to any existing data rather than generate all that data from scratch, you could import CSV or JSON data sets as tables here and then just tell the agent, hey, you always need to refer to this products table rather than generate your own, or learn from this data set that I just uploaded. It's a small data set, but I want you to scale that up to like 10,000 records, preserving all the trends that you find in it. It can do that sort of a thing too. And then when you're ready to use this data in whatever context you need, you can just go ahead and export it in any of these formats here, or you can push to a number of database platforms as well. You enter your connection information and then you actually push the data into that. So that's the general workflow of how you generate data within Fabricate. You generally start with some sort of a schema. It can be a structured definition like a SQL DDL. It could be a JSON schema. It can be an open API like YAML contract. You answer some questions, and then it goes and generates data, and you iterate with the agent in order to get the exact kind of data that you want. So it's a common use case to try to generate sort of a fake relational database to underpin a product or an API. But it's also quite a common use case to generate data for an API specifically. So the question is sort of like, if you're standing up an environment, do you want to go in through the back door by setting up a database? Or do you want to go through the front door, which is the API, by generating all the data necessary for an API? So this is a sort of exclusive look at a new feature that is coming in sort of beta in the next week or two called workflows that I want to show you. So imagine that you wanted to stand up a new Stripe sandbox. If you're not familiar, Stripe is probably the world's most popular payment platform. They allow you to stand up sandbox environments, which is sort of like your test environment. So nothing that happens there counts. Like you can enter fake credit card numbers, you can simulate payments, and then you can tear the thing down. So it's their own way of providing staging environments for a SaaS product. So if you wanted to generate all the data necessary to simulate some portion of the Stripe API, you could do that with Fabricate as well. So I'm going to switch over to this other empty scenario that I set up. And I've got, if I go, let's see, go back here. I've got a subset of Stripe's API contract here, basically to set up like customers and products and prices and subscriptions. And I can take this thing and I'm going to drop it in and say, I have my little prompt here that I remember I saved. So I want to generate data for a Stripe sandbox. Can you generate all the necessary data and then build me a workflow to push that data to Stripe, but make the base URI a variable? So now it's going to go through, figure out what data it needs to generate, and then it's going to build this new thing that you'll see at the end, which is a workflow that allows you to do sort of a repeatable task like validate data, like push data to an API, generate more data from a specific plan. All those sort of deterministic things workflows allow you to do. So I'm just going to answer its questions here. And I'll say, I want 100 customers, 5 products, each with 1 to 3 products. And then like everything else is up to you. So now it's going to go and generate the data. And while that's happening, you might be thinking to yourselves like, okay, what really separates this from like Gemini or ChatGPT? Where does the LLM end and the solution begin? So the key is really in the tools and the environment that LLM has. Like if you went into Gemini today and you asked it, give me fake data for this scenario, it's very hard for it to scale to like more than one table. And it would have to output every row in that table using its tokens, and it would be quite slow. You might get like 1 row a second. And so if you needed 1,000 customers, but every customer has 10 orders and every order has 10 items and it's going to take virtually forever. And there's no concept of like foreign keys or even a data store. And there's no sort of built-in augmentation of generating things that are algorithmic, like credit card numbers or Mongo, object IDs, UUIDs, anything like that. Like LLMs are not algorithmic in that way. So we've basically taken what we think is the best LLM right now, which is Claude, Sonnet, and Haiku, and then augmented it with things like a SQLite database, with the ability to write and execute JavaScript code in a secure sandbox, with a bunch of built-in data generators that can help it do these more algorithmic things, and with a bunch of other tools that help it approach this problem of data synthesis very quickly and in a scalable fashion. Plus, it's a nice SaaS tool that requires no setup. You sign up, you collaborate with folks, you put in your credit card, and off you go. So while I was saying all that, what it did was went and generated all the data that we need to push to Stripe. And it also built this new thing called a workflow that I can basically type in my base URI, hit run, and it's going to go and now send all that data to Stripe. And if you want to see the code behind it, you can see that here. But basically, went off and wrote that for me. And if it works on the first pull, it does. If not, I'll give it the error message and it'll go and fix that. So sometimes these things are more complicated and they don't necessarily work right out of the box. But for now, I've got, if I start my local server here, I'm not actually going to push to Stripe because I don't have a sandbox set up, but I've got a sort of a mock server that imitates Stripe here. And so that's going to run locally. And then I'll give it the port and stuff here, v1, and we'll see what it does. Okay, so it used a function that wasn't available, so I can literally just take this and see that's the error that I'm getting, and it should go and make a correction. So just like you're using a vibe coding tool, it can go and iterate on the workflows that it builds, and within a few iterations, it should have something that's fully working. Okay, let's see. All right, so now it's pushing all that data to my like mock of Stripe here locally, and you can see it pushed in all of the like customers, the products, the prices, and then subscribed customers to the various products. So from an API contract and a little bit of a description of what we needed, we could use Fabricate to generate the data, and then now also at the click of a button, push that data into our API to stand up a new environment. It could be a SaaS API, or it could be an API that your own company works on. And the idea is that these workflows are also callable via APIs as well, so they can become reusable parts of your sort of test data management. So to sort of sum up Fabricate, basically it's an AI studio for generating realistic synthetic data with a sort of bare minimum of guidance. You give it a schema, you give it some description of your use cases, you answer questions, it generates the data, and then you can use this workflows feature to do like repeatable tasks that are part of your everyday test data management workflow. Just sort of stepping back into the slides to round this off before I take questions, a little bit about how agents work in general. I mentioned an agent is basically an LLM plus tools. And underneath the hood, if you ever wanted to know, this is what an agent actually does. So you have the concept of a turn. A turn is like I send a message and the agent takes a number of semi-autonomous steps to react to that message. Like normally it makes some changes, asks some questions, outputs some text, makes some more changes, experiences an error, recovers from that error, and then says, I'm done, and then it hands back control to the user. All of that is a single turn. So the turn starts when the user enters their message, and that message becomes part of the chat context, which includes the system prompt, which you never really see, but you can coax it out of most LLMs if you're curious. All of the tool documentation. So for us, tools are things like ability to write JavaScript, ability to write to a database, ability to read the files that the user has uploaded, all that sort of thing. All of that gets put in the sort of chat window that you see, and that entire conversation is sent to the LLM each time. And the LLM starts off by doing some reasoning if it's using a thinking model like Sonnet, which is really just like, I think it's internally instructed to come up with a plan and sort of output that plan and then act on that plan. So you'll see sort of in light text within Fabricate or within Claude, that reasoning sort of flow through. And then it'll normally take some action, which is call a tool like query the database or write this JavaScript and run it. The tool is sort of a handoff back to the agent, the non-AI part, which is going to run that tool and hand back to the LLM the observation, the result of that tool. And then the LLM basically decides what to do with that. And it goes through this internal turn loop until it's decided that it's done. It has nothing else to do, and the user should be allowed to enter another message. So sometimes, like to bring it back actually to Fabricate, like this entering this first message here, it did some thinking, and then it immediately dropped into just asking questions. So it didn't make any tool calls. Then once I answered those questions, it did some more thinking. It output some text, and then it went through this whole series of tool calls and text before it eventually figured out it was done with everything, output a summary, and then sort of yielded back to me to create the workflow. So that's sort of a full turn there. And then, underneath the hood, this is a bit about what the Fabricate agent is. So it's got a series of tools like being able to run SQL, run JavaScript, do some file manipulation like grep, find, replace on files that it's working on. It can also generate documents like PDFs, Word files, emails. So there's a whole set of tools there. It has tools for exporting data in various formats, a bunch of other things. So there's quite a list of tools internally, too much to list. But the most important one is really its internal code sandbox, where it can write and run the code that does most of the generation. So that thing sort of has a bunch of tools in it on its own, like custom generators, the ability to connect to multiple databases, the ability to like fetch and post to third-party APIs, and to connect to LLMs. Then it has its own internal storage for things like users and accounts and all that, as well as where it stores the generated data, which is a SQLite database for each conversation that you create. And then ultimately, it's using either Anthropic, or if you bring your own LLM key, AWS Bedrock, to connect to the two latest Anthropic models. So that's a bit about how it works underneath the hood. And then here's sort of the leave behind resources that you can use to sign up today. So you can sign up for Fabricate for free at fabricate.tonic.ai. It comes with $10 in credits, so you can normally do a reasonable project based on that. And then there's a plus tier where you can upgrade for $29.99 a month, and you basically get unlimited usage. You just pay per use beyond the $25 credit that we give you per month. So there's docs, there's ways to connect with us, there's a Discord. But now's probably a good time to drop into the chat and the Q&A and see what questions we might have. And let me see, can I see the Q&A from here? Yes, I can.
Yeah, we have some questions in the Q&A. Do you want me to read them?
No, I can see them actually.
All right, perfect.
Okay, does the system avoid creating records that are too similar by looking at what the current records are? Yes, it can do that. So you'll see as it generates data, it's very progressive and context aware. Hold on, I just closed the thing here. Let me bring that QA back. So if I get out of this and then I go back up in here, when it generates subscriptions, for example, like it's actually querying the existing data to build out the keys. And so it can do that as well, like if it runs into uniqueness issues, or if you ask it to generate more data for a given column, it can look at and sample the existing data. It's a very iterative process. And that's sort of the point of having this internal storage versus like if you were to use just an LLM for this, all it really has is the context, previous messages, and LLMs don't work in sort of a quantitative way. So they don't really have the concept of like uniqueness. But a database and SQL, which it has access to, does have that concept and can be very concrete. And so, yeah, it has those sort of tools built in. Okay, so answering Nikhil's question, in order to generate synthetic data, how exactly are tools like the SQL database that you mentioned coming into play here during the data generation phase? It's basically a storage mechanism so that it can iteratively build up a data set, especially with relation to like relational integrity. So that, when it creates customers and then it's going to create orders, it makes sure all the orders tie back to actual customers. And it can also refer back and say like, oh, maybe I asked for a trend where women buy certain products more prevalently and men buy other products more prevalently. And so it can consult, okay, I'm generating purchases for this person with a particular profile. Now make sure that my rules match up with generating something realistic per the requirements that was given to me. How do you keep data consistent across multiple microservices that handles complex data across different database types? The best answer for that, I think, generally is to build out and model those microservices within a single database in Fabricate, so that like the database doesn't necessarily have to be a one-to-one with an actual database. That way it can sort of have either hard or soft relational integrity across these different dimensions or across different microservices. And it can all, it can query itself, it can see what data it's generated, and it can make sure that it maintains that integrity across the different dimensions. Let's see. And then, okay, so we answered all those. And then let's see, Tommy's question, how does the chat or LLM get stored on your side, and how do you enforce security and compliance to ensure that there aren't any data leaks of confidential information? So on our side, the chat is only stored in Tonic's database. We don't leverage any of the nascent storage capabilities at Anthropic or Bedrock. They don't particularly add any value anyway. So we store it in our own, internal database for the Fabricate product. That said, there's not really like a lot of ways that we can guarantee that you haven't leaked data to us. Like when you send data to us, you've sent it to us. And so it is possible for a user to drop in something that's sensitive. What we can offer, though, is two things. We're using this third-party LLM. Tonic has an agreement with Anthropic where they will not retain data. Anthropic already doesn't train on any data that you send in prompts, but if you ask nicely, they will also guarantee that they will not retain any data as well. And so Tonic has that agreement with Anthropic. For an extra security measure, you're also able, if you sign an enterprise plan with us, to bring your own Bedrock API key. And so the data is only ever being shared with Tonic and then your own Bedrock endpoint, which you sign an agreement with AWS that they don't train on your data, they don't retain your data. And so it's sort of the maximum amount of control without hosting your own AI model on your own expensive servers. Are open source LLMs supported? No, not at the moment. I feel that the open source LLMs are not equipped to solve the problem as well as what's provided by the big providers right now. That will probably change. This is a very fast-moving area, and I think, in particular, GPT-OSS is getting close. It's not quite there yet, and also the performance, oftentimes, of the open source models on the hardware that you can actually give it is not great because the reality is like these providers are plunging ungodly sums of money into providing the experience that they do. And it's very difficult to replicate that as a corporation that's trying to host your own models. So we don't provide support for that yet, but we are certainly open to it in the future once we feel like the technology catches up. It's also a bit of work to support multiple models, honestly. It's still sort of the Wild West in terms of how different AI providers work. They all have different APIs, they all have different capabilities, nuances. Even when they say they're OpenAI compatible, they're only sort of trivially so at the surface level. I imagine that will all standardize over the course of the next year or two. But for now, they're all pretty different with different capabilities. Okay, I see some in the chat as well. Um, can Fabricate create realistic documents? Yes. So you can go and ask it to, for example, generate like PDFs for receipts. So if I go back to, let me go back to my other database here, e-commerce. Um, and this, we're actually doing another release very soon that helps improve the styling here. But I can do something like generate PDF receipts for the first 10 payments. So it will generate documents that are based on the structured context. Um, you can also just upload a document and say like make more like this, and it'll generate all the structured elements, generate the data, and then generate the document for that. And sometimes it takes a few turns for it to get it exactly right. But it'll generate PDFs, it'll generate Word documents, it'll generate emails. Right now, it does it all based on Markdown, and but it's also going to be able to do that based on HTML with custom styling, and it'll be pretty good at actually replicating styles. So let me show you an example. Right now, the styling is pretty plain, but the content is all based on the real generated structured data that you have. And it can also do like very good unstructured data as well. So if you ask it like to write reviews for products, it can go off and write context sensitive reviews, like large paragraphs of information where it's an actual customer that actually bought that product in your database, and the review reflects the reality of that product, like what it is and what its like positives or negatives might be based on the description of the product. So Fabricate really runs the gamut of like purely structured to unstructured to document generation. Fabricate cannot be self-hosted right now. We're only offering Fabricate as a cloud solution, and we do offer the ability to use your own Bedrock, but that's as close as we get. We don't actually offer the ability to self-host right now. Size limitations for the generated data, Tomislav asks. That's always a very difficult question to answer because you've got rows and columns as tables and tables as many different dimensions of size, plus also the size on disk. But I would say generally, if you're generating things like in the millions of records per table, that's not particularly difficult. That wouldn't take much more time than what I've shown here. As you were watching it generate data, normally you see it write code for 10, 20 seconds, and then the data generation is almost instant because the code runs pretty fast. So you have to generate quite a lot of data before the actual data generation winds up taking more than the time, just the overhead and writing the code for each of the tables. So it is meant to scale pretty well. I think that's all the questions. Happy to answer any others. Oh, no, I see a few more that came in the Q&A here. Okay, so Nikhil asks, unsure if it was covered already. Does Fabricate or any other product from Tonic help with generating unstructured data from different data sources? Fabricate would really be the best at that. Some combination of Fabricate and textual. So it depends. If you've got a lot of unstructured data and you just want to be able to use that redacted and synthesized, then Tonic Textual is the product built to do exactly that. If you've only got a tiny sample of unstructured data and you want to generate more like that, then Fabricate is the better thing to do. You could upload those documents into the Fabricate chat and you could say, give me more like this, and it will figure out the data elements in that document and it'll produce something that is reasonably similar looking. Wouldn't necessarily be exact, but it will have the content that you need and like close enough, I think, in most cases, layout wise. Certainly, if you're just indexing those documents for a RAG system, then it'll give you everything you need. Even what I've just shown you, just with the Markdown-based layout, would be enough, I think, there. A question about how to keep costs and token consumption down. It's a good question. It will chew up a certain amount of tokens as you're using the product. We definitely are continuing to work on bringing token consumption down. In fact, in the last week, we released a major update where if you upload a huge schema, like let's say it's got 500 tables in it. That schema never actually makes it into the chat context. We translate the schema sort of out of bound with a cheaper model that costs almost nothing, even if it's gigantic. And then Fabricate learns about the tables by querying its own database. So that cuts down on a lot of things. There's not a lot you as a user can really do other than like try not to drop unnecessarily large things into the chat context, because we actually do have the 1 million token limit, so we can use quite a large context. But Fabricate itself is very much concerned with this problem and is iterating on it all the time to make the use of those LLM tokens. And our approach in general is to not generate data using the LLM, but to generate code that generates data. So it already generates data much more efficiently than just an off-the-shelf LLM. Okay. And then Tommy's question, if you're looking to build a data set for end-to-end functional integration test through Tonic on a QA environment, which involves multiple backend systems, and you needed to create a user in a certain state, how would you tackle this problem with Tonic? That kind of like, I need a very specific use case is the problem where Fabricate tends to shine best. This comes up a lot in the healthcare space for whatever reason. Like we get a lot of companies that deal with HL7 data that are like, I need a patient with this very specific profile and all the interactions they would have in the course of the visits with a doctor for this profile. So when you have to contrive or model a very specific situation, especially with like a small amount of data, but it has to be very nuanced, Fabricate tends to be the best one to work with there. So you just want to make Fabricate aware of all the different models that it needs to populate. And then you provide a description of that use case and it'll go and generate all the data. And then you would just need to push it into those various systems. So if you give it, a combination of like the model or the API contract, it'll know how to organize the data and push into those systems. Versus like structural is great at reproducing everything that exists in production. So if you're more confident that you have a ton of production data and like whatever is worth testing or worth looking at exists in production, or if it doesn't exist in production, it's not worth looking at, then structural is an ideal solution. It takes very little setup. There's no iteration. It just is going to provide everything that's there in production, preserve all the things you don't even know about, and make it so that you can use all or a subset of that data in your testing staging environment. Is there a way to try out Tonic Fabricate? Yeah, you can just go to tonic.fabricate.ai. So I was actually testing off a local host here because I wanted to show the feature that's not yet released, which is workflows. But if you just go to fabricate.tonic.ai, you can self-sign up and you immediately drop into the free tier, which is essentially free forever. You just get $10 worth of credits. And then once you run out, you either have to upgrade to the $29.99 a month plan, and then you get $20 more worth of credits to use against that plan. And then if you run over that, you can pay per credit after that. But if you can stay within the free plan, then you can try it for as long as you need. And if you want to try a larger engagement, please feel free to reach out to us and we can work with teams and give you a sense of what like the enterprise features in terms of collaboration and sharing would be. Okay.
Perfect. I think those are all the questions. Great questions, guys. But thank you, Mark, and thanks everyone for joining. In case you come up with questions again, I will be sharing this platform engineering Slack link in the chat. But yeah, don't worry, I will be sharing with you the links again. So thank you so much. And